As writers, we hear an awful lot about plot and story structure, but in my opinion, we don't really hear enough about writing scenes. But in truth, scenes are where the story happens. Everything in your story happens within a series of scenes. And so in this next video series, we're going to be talking about how to take that big idea of plot and really flesh it out into individual scenes that will keep your readers engaged and turning pages late into the night. So my name is Sarah Cannon. Welcome to Heart Breathings. This is going to be a 5-part series called Writing Great Scenes, and I'm excited to get started. With plot, you have overarching structure, which is great because you need some kind of structure to any story that you're telling, but that's where a lot of writers get stuck, trying to figure out how those plot points actually connect and come together to create your story. Imagine that you're building a house, so you need a foundation and you need the basic structure, right? But if you don't have walls and drywall and plumbing and electricity and decor and lighting and all of those things, then it's not really a very livable house. And the same is true for your story. So it's great to have the overarching structure, but unless you fill it with dialogue and interesting characters and conflict and action and, story, then you don't really have a readable, engaging story. So plot is definitely a good place to start, but it's really when you start to understand the structure and the depth of how to create really good, engaging scenes that your writing really starts to come alive. All of the action, the character development, all of the plot points that you come up with, all of this happens within the structure of scenes, a series of scenes. You may have heard that common phrase before that scenes are the building blocks of your novel, and that is absolutely true. I think K.M. Weiland likes to call them dominoes because it's really a cause and effect. So Lisa Crone in her book Story Genius says that it is a cause and effect trajectory. So that means that every single thing that happens in your book leads to another thing and then knocks down another domino, and that leads to another thing. And so learning how to write great scenes is about really not only writing a great mini story inside each scene, but then connecting it to the scenes that come before and after it in a cohesive way that begin to play off of each other. And this is where it can start to feel a little bit overwhelming. So trust me that we are going to take this and break it down tiny step by tiny step. And it is my hope that by the end of this 5-part series, you are going to feel really excited about sitting down and writing scenes for your book. Now, in this series, I am going to be sharing a lot of what I have learned in my own experience of over a decade of writing professionally, writing more than 27 novels. And of course, I'll be referencing some of the teachers and great authors that I have learned from. And as always, I will have a list of some of my favorite books on character development, dialogue, scene structure, and some of the greatest resources that I have found throughout my career as a writer. So you can find those in the description box below, and you can find them in the free workbook. So you guys know me, if you've been around for a while, I love to create workbooks that will help you to really take what you've learned here and put it in action for your own story. So I have created a workbook that accompanies this 5-part series. And if you are on my newsletter list, it is now in your HB resource library. And if you're not on my newsletter list, all you have to do is click the link down below in the description, join, and you will get instant access to this workbook as well as many others that I have in my resource library. Okay, so let's get started. What is a scene? According to Webster's dictionary, a scene is a single interesting or important happening in a play or story. So it's pretty vague. A single interesting moment or point. Some people like to say that a scene is anytime you have like a unique combination of characters or setting, and anytime that shifts, like a new character enters the room or the setting changes, then the scene also ends and a new scene begins. I don't always know that it's that cut and dry for me. I think it's an individual choice in terms of what you would like to define as an individual scene. For me, it feels like it's all about transition. So anytime you have something happening and then something comes in to interrupt that, either you've got a change of location or you have a transition to a new set of characters or a transition to a new topic or something like that, then the one scene has ended and another scene has begun. I think often choosing when a scene starts and ends is a very intuitive process for a writer. So I would say don't get so hung up on the definition of a scene, but just trust yourself to know that when you feel that a transition has come, that something has come to an end and now it's time for something new, that you've got a new scene on your hands. Sometimes it's going to be really obvious, like something happens that's like a twist moment and then it jumps to a totally different location or a totally different set of characters. You know you've got a new scene. Sometimes it's going to be less obvious. So if you have a couple that's been at dinner and they carry their conversation out onto the street to walk home or to get in a cab, is the scene changing just because they left the restaurant? Maybe, maybe not. I think that's going to be up to you. But don't get so hung up on the definitions of how other people see it, and really trust yourself and your own intuition, which leads me to another point as we get started here, that of course I'm going to share my knowledge, but when it comes to writing and craft, there's really no one size fits all for everyone. There are no rules that can't be broken, or there are no like, this is the only way kind of situations. It's just what works for you and what doesn't. So throughout this entire series, I hope that you'll learn what you can, add your comments to the conversation down below if you have other things to add, and take what works for you and dismiss anything else, because one person's opinion or what they've learned over the years doesn't necessarily work for you, and that is okay. But like I said, for me, I think of scenes in terms of transitions or one sort of encapsulated little moment. It's sort of like a mini story. So you have the overarching story, and then you have these tiny little moments, these tiny mini stories that string together to make up the whole plot of your story. And so it's an intuitive thing. It could be a transition to a new character, to a new setting. It could be someone new entering the room. It could be the conversation changes. But I always look for those transitions and the feel of it. But to be clear, what I'm not talking about is chapters. So some writers will make every chapter a new scene. Sometimes I do this in my own writing. So I will sometimes have very short chapters because it's just a very short scene. However, some writers will put 3 or 4 scenes into a single chapter, and it's really just a matter of your personal choice and your personal writing style, or what's more common in your genre. So what we're not talking about in this series is chapters, and I want to just make that clear. Instead, we're talking about scenes, and how you arrange that into chapters is going to be a topic for another day. But for me, I always think of a scene as a mini story. So you've got the overarching story, that's your plot told through, the entire book. But you also have a series of mini stories, little conversations between characters, small realizations, new development in some way, or something that changes the story. So you have a series of mini stories, and those are the scenes. And I see them in terms of transitions. So whenever a new character enters the room, or we've finally found out this big piece of news that we were looking for, or a big action scene has ended and we transition to something else, I think intuitively you can feel that transition from one scene to the next. But let me know in the comments down below how you define a scene and how you determine when a scene starts or ends, and we'll talk about that more as the series goes on. Engaging scenes usually have, I think, the following 5 components to them. One being a point of view character, a single point of view character, hopefully one that your reader is invested in or cares about what happens to in some kind of way, who has a clear goal or desire. They are trying to get something, they're trying to learn something, they're trying to find something or escape from somewhere. They have something that they're trying to do or obtain, or something they desire. And in some way, that's what this scene is about, what they're trying to get or do, their goal or desire. Number 2, a clear setting. So we don't want the readers to be confused about where this scene is taking place. We want the reader to feel fully oriented in where we are and what that setting is telling us about the world itself. And it's, of course, as we talk about world building, what we're talking about is world building through a series of scenes through the eyes of the characters. They're always telling us, show, don't tell. And when it comes to world building, instead of just saying, here's the world that my character lives in, you're going to show that through setting and through the interactions that your character has with that setting or with the people in that setting. So a clear setting, a reader knows where we are. Now, of course, there's always going to be exceptions to these rules. So maybe sometimes the setting isn't so clear because you're purposely trying to ask questions, have the readers ask questions, but for the most part, a clear setting is important. Number 3, a point of tension or conflict. So conflict is also really just an obstacle to your character's goals. So they're trying to escape, someone comes in and catches them and puts them back in prison. Your character is trying to get information out of someone and the witness won't talk. Your character is trying to tell someone how they feel about them, but someone else keeps coming in and interrupting. There's a million ways to put conflict and tension into a scene, but it is one of the most important things. Every single scene needs to have some kind of conflict. It can be super overt and action, or it can be subtle and emotional, but there always needs to be some sort of focus point of tension and conflict in your story. And if you can get really good at layering conflict, where you have multiple layers of internal and external conflict going on at the same time, then you've really got readers on the edge of their seat. So we're going to talk a lot more about conflict in this series. Number 4, a connection to the scenes that came before and after, and to the story goal as a whole. In other words, your scene needs to have some kind of purpose and it needs to move the story forward in some way. So we're going to talk about this more in a separate video as well. But basically, one of the biggest mistakes that I see a lot of newer writers making is that they create scenes because they know they want to show you something about your character or something about the world, but they're not connecting that scene to anything else that happens later in the book. So it just feels like a random scene that doesn't really have a purpose that's connected or woven into the story or plot as a whole. When you get really good at writing engaging scenes and engaging stories, you're going to understand the connection between the scenes and the overall plot of the story. And every single scene needs to have a goal and it needs to have a purpose in terms of forwarding the entire plot or your character's arc in some way. Number 5, an outcome that stimulates some kind of change and then leads us to the next scene. So Lisa Crone, in her book Story Genius, I actually have it right here, this book, which will be listed down below with a lot of others that I love. She calls this an escalating cause and effect trajectory. And I just love that because that basically encapsulates what scenes do. So every single scene should be intensifying and escalating this idea of cause and effect, or what Jack Bickham calls stimulus and response. So we're going to get into that as we go through this series. But basically, every single scene needs to have some kind of outcome that changes things. It changes your character's mind, changes their point of view or how they see something. It changes their circumstances, but somehow it changes it. K.M. Weiland calls this a disaster. I think also Jack Bickham does. So something happens to your character. They don't get the goal they were looking for because of that obstacle, and it ends in some kind of result or outcome that leads us into the next decision, the next action, the next part of the story. And all of these 5 components need to work together in perfect harmony. So this is where we understand that sometimes writing great scenes is really what your story is all about, and it can make or break you as a writer. In this 5-part series, we are going to go through some of these 5 elements in greater detail, and we're going to cover things like why your character needs a goal or a desire and how that plays into their overall character arc, as well as the overall story structure. We're going to talk about how to really infuse every scene with great conflict, and that doesn't just mean action or battle or arguments. It can mean subtle things as well. So we're going to talk about the different feel of conflict and different examples of conflict. We are going to talk about scene structure, and we're going to talk about something that Jack Bickham called scene and sequel, which is really about, like I said, stimulus and response and how that plays into the pacing of your overall novel. And we're going to talk about how each scene organically connects all the pieces of the puzzle to create that overall plot that we're so familiar with. Of course, anytime we're talking about the craft of writing, like I said, there are going to be exceptions to the rules, but there is value in understanding the basic fundamentals of what goes into a great scene so that then you, as the writer and the artist, can take it and make it your own and play with it from a place of intention and purpose. And that's when you really start to get power as a writer, when you understand the fundamentals and then you begin to play off of readers' expectations and you're going to get them turning pages wishes late into the night and buying every book you've ever written. Once I, as a writer, really started to understand how each scene organically leads into the next and how no individual scene stands alone, that somehow it has a purpose for either the character's arc or for the story's arc or even for the series arc, and how everything plays off of each other like cause and effect, my writing became so much stronger. So my hope for you in this series is to help you have hopefully a few light bulb moments of your own as you're trying to take this big idea of story structure and figure out how to break that down into tiny little scenes or moments or mini stories that make up your whole plot. So I'm excited to take you on this journey. I hope that you find this helpful. Make sure, if you're really interested in this, that you not only subscribe to this channel, I would love for you to like this video. And if you would, head to that link down below, sign up for my mailing list, and grab the accompanying Write Great Scenes workbook that you can find down below. Not only does it have a lot of great tips that you're going to follow and hear throughout this series, as well as a real workbook that you can fill out when you're creating your own scenes, it also has a resource list that has all of my favorite books that you can go and grab if you want to go deeper on these topics, because I highly recommend each of these books. I have read them personally and I absolutely love them and refer to them often, so go check those out. So let's get started. I'm excited to talk about scenes. And also, I do want to just remind you before we go that my Publish and Thrive self-publishing class is opening for enrollment this upcoming Sunday, July 17th. So if you've been looking to join, this is going to be your last chance to join for 2022, and I would love to have you in there. So on Sunday, I will have a new video that is just kind of talking about not only what my best-selling book is and how many copies of it I've sold, but how much I've made off of some of my best-selling books and why I think that those books were my most popular books. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the course and answer some of the frequently asked questions. So if you do have any questions about Publish and Thrive, go ahead and put them down in the comments or send them to me in email. And I will see you guys on Sunday for that next video. And then next Thursday, we will have the second video in Writing Great Scenes series, where we're going to talk specifically about characters and their goals and why they need to have a goal in each scene and how that plays into their character arc. So it's going to be a great video, and I hope you'll join me again for the rest of this series. I'll also be speaking this weekend at the authortube writing conference, which is a free conference here on YouTube. So check the description box for all the links. All right, I will see you guys in that next video. Bye.